بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم اللهم فقنا في الدين وعلمنا التأويل ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بك يا أرحم الراحمين أما بعد Alhamdulillah, this is module 3 and we've covered a lot of material in the Fard Ain. In module 1, we covered Aqidah, and in module 2, we covered the bridge between Aqidah and law, talking about the transmission of Islam. So now we are in module 3, which is in the area of fiqh. What is fiqh? Fiqh is law. The meaning of fiqh in the Arabic language is fahmu ma daqqa. It is deep understanding. And in the Sharia terminology, fiqh is the science pertaining to the rulings of the Sharia, primarily the outward rulings. So normally the way this is supposed to work is after we learn our Aqidah and we get into fiqh, we begin with the section on tahara, on purification, water, bathroom etiquette, how to make wudu and ghusl, and all the areas in the area of purification, followed by what area? Salat, because the two go hand in hand. So normally we would be starting with tahara, but because we are 2 weeks away from Ramadan, alhamdulillah, we are on the cusp of the month of fasting. So it makes sense for us to use these last 2 weeks of class to talk about the fiqh of fasting. What is necessary for us to know as Muslims in order to fulfill the obligation of fasting. Now you'll notice that the title is the fiqh of fasting and not the fiqh of Ramadan. And that is because there are other kinds of fast besides Ramadan that are also obligatory. We know Ramadan is the month of fasting that is fard, it's an obligation on us, but there are other fasts that are obligatory. So we're covering the fiqh of fasting in general. What you're going to see in this module are a lot of details that may not pertain to you. As we go through certain lists and examples, you may see them and think, that would never happen to me. That's so obscure, that's so strange. How could that ever happen? Why would I need to know what to do if I swallow sawdust in the middle of the day while fasting? Well, maybe you're a carpenter, and then that's a very pertinent question. So fiqh deals not with ideals, it deals with realities. Fiqh is not just for pious people, it's for pious people and impious people. Fiqh is not just for the person who lives a perfectly clean and uncomplicated life. No, fiqh details all of the complexities of human life and all of the strange things that may happen to us as human beings. So before we get into the fiqh of fasting, al-asa liman asa. So before we get into the fiqh of fasting itself, we want to cover a few key terms because we are covering the fiqh of fasting according to the school of Imam Abu Hanifa rahimahullah ta'ala. And in the school of Imam Abu Hanifa, they have certain key terminologies that are a little bit different from the other three schools. And this will all make sense when we get to it. The foundation for fasting is established in the Quran, where Allah Ta'ala addresses the believers with the command, Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu kutiba alaykum as-siyam kama kutiba ala alladhina min qablikum la'allakum tattaqun. O you who believe, fasting has been prescribed for you as it was prescribed for those before you, so that you may attain piety, taqwa. And the Prophet ﷺ tells us in the hadith recorded by Imam Al-Bukhari, من صام رمضان إيمانا واحتسابا غفر له ما تقدم من ذنبه. Whoever fasts the month of Ramadan with belief and anticipation of reward, his past sins are forgiven. Fasting is the fourth pillar of Islam. The Shahada of La ilaha illallah Muhammadun Rasulullah is the first one. That's a verbal articulation of Aqeedah. The next pillar is Salat, which we're going to learn after Ramadan. And then comes Zakat. But we're going to learn the fourth pillar of Islam now, that of fasting. Fasting in the month of Ramadan. So our objectives are to just do a little bit of review from Module 2, looking at the 5 rulings of Sharia, and a brief review of the 4 types of authority in revealed text. And then we'll look at some of the terms used in the Hanafi school, and the definition of fasting, the different types of fast, and when is Ramadan established. So we're not actually covering the ins and outs of the fast until next week. We're establishing all of the prerequisites to understanding the fiqh of siyam. A lot of what we're going to cover next week is irrelevant to most people. So if you just get up and have an intention in the middle of the night, and you get up for suhoor, and you begin your fast, and nothing goes into your body, and you break your fast, alhamdulillah, you're good. So most of the details wouldn't apply to you, but we have other details to cover. So who can remind us what are the 5 main rulings in Sharia? Al-Ahkam al-Khams. Wajib. So shall we do Arabic or English? Okay, let's do Arabic. All right, so wajib, number 1. Mustahab. Mubah. Makruh. And haram. These are the 5. So, there you go. These are the 5: obligatory, recommended, neutral, disliked, and unlawful. We said that every single thing that we do or say is going to fall into one of these 5. This is what we're learning in fiqh. This is a particular division of the legal rulings in Sharia. So everyone's up to date with this, and we're aware. If you remember in Module 2, we talked about the different weights given to the revealed text of the Quran and the Sunnah. We said that you have what is clear cut or probabilistic, qat'i or dhanni. Remember that? So you have what is qat'i al-wurud and qat'i al-dilala. What is a clear cut definitive transmission and a clear cut definitive meaning or indication. So you have transmission and meaning, which can be clear cut or probabilistic. You remember this, right? So this is something you should be reviewing because it comes up in Hanafi fiqh, this division. Okay. So we mentioned that there's clear-cut transmission plus clear-cut indication, qat'i 100%. Clear-cut transmission plus probabilistic indication, dhanni. Probabilistic transmission plus clear-cut indication, dhanni. And lastly, probabilistic transmission plus probabilistic indication, dhanni. This is very important for Hanafi fiqh. So in Hanafi fiqh, we are not operating on the framework of the 5 legal categories. They're still there, but they give a different division and breakdown of these categories. So the 5 legal rulings are agreed upon by all of the ulama. But in the Hanafi school, the jurists, the fuqaha of the Ahnaf, have a different division of these rulings based on what is qat'i and what is dhanni. So they're looking at the legal rulings not just in the category of 5, what is haram, what is makruh, what is mubah, mustahab, and wajib. They're looking at the relative strength. Which of these are qat'i, which of these are dhanni, and they have further subdivisions based on that. So this is important to know because the rulings in Hanafi fiqh reflect this particularly unique Hanafi way of dividing the rulings. So what are they? Here you have them all. In the next two slides, you have the way these are divided. So the positive command, the amr, the divine command, is either fard or wajib, right? Now, in the other madhahib of Imam Shafi'i, Imam Malik, Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal, they don't have a distinction between wajib and fard. It's interchangeable because both of them mean mandatory or obligatory. So in the other three schools, fard and wajib are essentially the same thing. There's no difference. But in the Hanafi school, they make a distinction between what is fard and what is wajib. So the fard in the Hanafi school, according to their usul, is that thing which is an obligation based on a text that is qat'i in its transmission, clear cut, and qat'i in its indication. So if you go back to the previous slide, you see this list here. Of the four, only number one is clear cut both in transmission and indication. So in the Hanafi school, that would be fard. So going back, if the text is not qat'i, either in wurud, its transmission, or its indication, but it's indicating an obligation, they will call this wajib. So for the Shafi'is and the Malikis and the Hanbalis, they'd say this is wajib and fard, it's the same thing. The Hanafis would say no, this is fard because the text supporting it is clear cut in transmission and in its meaning. It doesn't leave any other interpretation open. This is fard, and this other thing is obligatory, but we call it wajib. So they make this distinction. One is stronger than the other in its indication and in transmission. This is important because as you'll see, in the division of the types of fast and the different rulings. When they look at mustahab, it's almost the same thing. For the other madhahib, they have different distinctions too, but in the Hanafi school, you have different types of recommended acts. And they have different degrees of emphasis. So, for instance, in the Hanafi school, if something is a sunnah mu'akkada, an emphasized sunnah, it is a sunnah, it's not wajib, but if you purposely left it for a period of time, you would be deemed sinful, right? We're not going to focus too much on these right now. That comes mostly later. But we have the highly emphasized sunnah. We have the non-highly emphasized sunnah. We have the nafil, which is the voluntary, open-ended, voluntary, extra deeds you may do. And lastly, you have the general mustahab. Yeah, it's encouraged. Our focus here is on fard and wajib and the distinction between the two. When you come to the prohibitions, you get the same subdivision. You have the haram, which is qat'i in wurud and dilala. It's clear cut in indication, clear cut in transmission. That is what they will call haram. But what if something is in the Quran or the Sunnah and the indication, it's speaking about something being forbidden, but the indication is not definitive, it's probabilistic. In the Hanafi school, they will call that makruh tahrimi, right? Which means prohibitively disliked. It's disliked, but in a prohibitive manner, meaning it's for other madhab, it's still haram. So in the Hanafi school, when they say makruh tahrimi, for the other schools, that means haram. And then they have makruh tanzihi, which means mildly disliked, which corresponds to the makruh used in the other schools. This is a little bit to get your head around it first, but you'll see why we use these terms, because in the school, different acts fall under different categories and different rulings apply. So in the Hanafi school, you have more than just five. You have fard, you have wajib, right? And in the prohibitive things, you have what is haram, meaning clear-cut indication, clear-cut transmission. And then you have prohibitively disliked, makruh tahrimi, and makruh tanzihi, which is mildly disliked. The mildly disliked corresponds to the regular makruh in the other categories. The makruh tahrimi corresponds to haram in the other schools, and the haram corresponds to the haram in the other schools. So this division is based on the relative strength and definitive nature of the text used to prove those things. So we have to get this out of the way. After this, it's all fiqh, it's all law. All right? So we'll revisit these terms. And as we mentioned last week, as a way of studying fiqh, you need to review these terms, quiz yourself. You can write note cards and quiz yourself on the meanings of these terms and how they're different from each other. Okay, so we come now to fasting, siyam. In Arabic, the word siyam or sawm means imsak, mutlaqul imsak, which is basically unconditional restraint. Unconditional restraint. But in the Sharia, the technical fiqhi meaning of siyam is refraining from entering anything into the body cavity. I want you to try to number these out. Refraining from entering anything into the body cavity, whether deliberately or accidentally, or engaging in intercourse, from true dawn to the time the sun sets, accompanied with the intention of fasting, from individuals who are permitted to fast. There are 6 issues within this ta'rif, this definition, and we're going to be exploring them in detail next week. But first we have to establish the types of fast and how we establish the entering of Ramadan as well as other months. This is the definition we'll be revisiting. Now in the school of Imam Abu Hanifa, there's different types of fast, just like there are different types of fast in the other schools. But their division is a little different from the others. So we have the obligatory fast, and the mandatory fast, the sunnah fast, the recommended, and the prohibitively disliked, the voluntary, the mildly disliked. We'll go through all of these. Earlier I said that there's more than just Ramadan that's obligatory for us to fast. Ramadan is, of course, at the top of the list. The fard type of fast, number 1, is the current Ramadan. The current Ramadan. Not the days from your previous Ramadan that you missed, because those would be expiations. Those would be makeups or qada. So qada is distinct from ada. So in Sharia, whether it's salat or siyam, you have 2 types of actions. You have the ones that are due upon you in the moment, right now, and then you have the ones that were due on you in the past that you have to make up. So let's say we have the adhan for Isha, we all line up for salat. That Isha is the current Isha that we're praying. If someone overslept or they missed a prayer and the time has run out, when they go to pray that prayer, their intention is that it is the qada, it's a make-up prayer. They're not offering the current prayer in that time. Same thing for fasting. In 2 weeks we have Ramadan. When we begin that fast, that will be our ada, our current fast. If there are previous days of Ramadan that we missed, whether last year or the year before, those have to be made up, and those are called qada. Both of these types are fard because it's an obligation to fast the current Ramadan and to make up your past ones. Both are fard. Beneath that, you have the types of fast that are wajib. So they're not fard, but they're wajib. So still obligatory, right? According to the other schools, these are still obligatory. It's just a different degree of obligation, epistemologically. So the mandatory fasts are the kafara type fast. if you have to offer an expiation, if a person breaks their fast on purpose without an excuse, they have to do kafara. They have to expiate for the sin of breaking their fast. That's wajib. They have to do that. Likewise, if a person swears an oath, they take a vow, they say, by Allah, if I get that job, I'm going to fast for 10 days. They've now taken a vow. If that vow takes effect, then they are obligated to fulfill that vow. They have to. So this is the nadhr, the vowed fast. This is wajib to offer. Likewise, making up broken voluntary fasts. So let's say you wake up one day, you decide, this it's not a special day as such, but you decide you're going to fast that day as an extra day. So you're fasting that day, everything's going well, and then a relative shows up, or you're invited to someone's house and you go and you feel, okay, I'm going to break the fast to entertain guests or to be a good guest or a host or whatever. If you break that fast, you have to make it up. Even though it's voluntary in its origin, once you initiate it, if it's broken, you have to make that up. This is in the Hanafi school. Now, the Sunnah fast in the school of Imam Abu Hanifa is fasting Ashura, which is the 10th of Muharram, with either the 9th or the 11th along with it. It's makruh to fast the 10th alone. You should fast the 9th and the 10th, or the 10th and the 11th. And it's makruh to only fast on the 10th, on Ashura. That's the sunnah. As far as mustahab or mandub fast are concerned, these are at a slightly lower degree in terms of their emphasis. These are 3 days a month, right? Whether they are the ayyam al-bid or otherwise, whether they're the 13th, 14th, or 15th, or any other day. Mondays and Thursdays, and 6 days in Shawwal, right? Not outside of Shawwal, but in Shawwal, whether they are consecutive, one day after the other, or if they are done spread out during the month. It's preferable to do them together consecutively, but you can spread them out. These are recommended. Voluntary fast, we said, it's just a voluntary extra good deed you do. Those are voluntary fasts. Any day of fasting where it's not disliked, that's a nafil fast. As far as those fasts that are haram for the other schools, or we call makruh tahrimi in the Hanafi school, the prohibitively disliked fast, or the days of Eid, fasting on the day of Eid is prohibited, and also fasting on the ayyam al-tashriq, the 3 days after Eid al-Adha. Ayyam al-tashriq literally means the days of drying out the meat, because in Arabia, in those days, they would offer the sacrifice. They would cut up the animal and skin it, cut the meat, string it up and dry it out for making camel jerky or whatever. So those were called ayyam al-tashriq, the days of drying out the meat. It is prohibitively disliked to fast on those days as well. So basically the days after Eid al-Adha, those 3 days, you don't fast either. There are other days where it's mildly disliked to fast. It's not haram, but it's makruh, mildly disliked. And that is to single out Friday, to single out Saturday. Not if you fasted a Thursday and intend to fast a Friday. Not if you're fasting the fast of Dawood, which is every other day, and it just happens to fall on a Friday. No, it is purposely singling out Friday and not any day before it or after it. That's makruh. Same thing for Saturday. It's also makruh to fast on the day of the Nayruz, which is the Persian spring holiday, as well as the Mahrajan, which is the Persian autumn holiday. You understand the fiqh of Imam Abu Hanifa was in these regions where these cultural practices were a thing. So this was found within the fiqh. They said it's makruh to fast on those days, the specific holidays that have non-Islamic origins. And we could apply that to any non-Muslim holiday. To purposely fast on that day would be makruh. It's likewise makruh tanzihi, to do consecutive fasting, wisal. Wisal is when you fast for 2 or more days without breaking it. Say you take the suhoor on a Monday, and at iftar time on Monday you don't break your fast, and you continue through the night and through Tuesday fasting without taking iftar. If you did that, it's mildly disliked. It's makruh tanzihi, because the Prophet ﷺ instructed that no one should do that. It is only for him to do, ﷺ. And lastly, the makruh fasting, makruh tanzihi, is perpetual fasting, sawm al-dahr, which is to fast for the entire year. And this would be a person who wants to fast on every single day except for the days of Eid and the days of Tashriq. A person says, those are prohibited days to fast. I'm not going to fast on those days, but every other day I'm going to be fasting. In the school of Imam Abu Hanifa, this is makruh, because one of the objectives of fasting is training yourself with discipline and experiencing something that is out of the norm for you in other times of the year. So if fasting becomes the absolute norm and that's all you do, it loses sight of one of the objectives of fasting. So, I mean, no one's doing this, but this is how they list it out. All right. Who has to fast? Fasting in the month of Ramadan is fard, obligatory, on every Muslim, male and female, who is sane and pubescent. Who does that exclude? Go further back. Non-Muslims, prepubescent children, and people who are insane, right? So, male or female, if you have reached the age of puberty and beyond, and you are sane as a Muslim, you are required to fast. How do we determine who is pubescent and who is not? We don't assume that that's so obvious to everyone, so we explain it. The signs being nocturnal emission, ihtilam, or the growth of pubic hair, menstrual cycle. And if none of the physical signs of puberty emerge at all, then according to Imam Abu Hanifa, when the person reaches 15 years of age. If a person reached 15 years of age and there was no other sign, then at the age of 15 they are determined to have reached puberty, regardless of what has not appeared. So this is upon whom it's obligatory. That doesn't mean we shouldn't encourage our younger children to fast. It just means that it's not technically wajib on them. If they choose not to fast, if they break the fast halfway through, if they go and eat a cookie and say, I'm tired, they're not sinful. And if they complete the fast, they get a reward, right? So we encourage them, ideally where they can do half days, quarter days, full days, and they get used to it. And then when they become pubescent, it's easy. They've been doing it already. Now we come to my favorite part of tonight's class, which is the controversial one. When does fasting become obligatory? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us in the Quran when it becomes obligatory. In the verses detailing fasting, He says to us, فَمَنْ شَهِدَ مِنْكُمُ الشَّهْرَ فَلْيَصُمْ. Whosoever among you witnesses it, let him fast. Witness what? The moon, the hilal. Whosoever witnesses it, whoever sees it, let him fast it. So the fuqaha say that the beginning of Ramadan is established by A, the sighting of the crescent moon, or the completion of 30 days of Sha'ban. Because how many days do we have in the Islamic calendar? 29 or 30. So if you do not sight the moon, the hilal, on the 29th, then you finish the 30th day and that completes the lunar month. And then the next day after that would be the first of the new lunar month. So you're either seeing the crescent moon, or if you don't see it, you wait for that day for the completion of the month. And that day after the 29th, where the moon has not been sighted, is called Yawm al-Shak, the day of doubt. Because you don't really know. Could the hilal be out there behind the clouds? Maybe. You don't know. If the clouds are there, maybe it's there, you just can't see it. Or maybe you're in a place where it wasn't possible. Who knows? It's called the day of doubt, and it's disliked to fast on that day in the school of Imam Abu Hanifa. It's disliked. And this would be the day after the 29th of Sha'ban. Now that's easy enough, but we have moon sighting issues, and if you've been living in North America long enough, you'll know that depending on where you are, this becomes a very heated topic every single year. People are butting heads, they're arguing, they're debating, and people are asking, why can't all these imams just get their act together and figure out something easy for everybody? Well, it's actually quite complicated. It's a very complex process because there are lots of different fiqhi opinions about the various issues concerning the sighting of the moon. Now, the very basic aspect of it is that in the beginning of Ramadan, if the day, as we're leading into Ramadan, let's say it's the 29th of Sha'ban, and you go out toward the end of the evening, late Asr time, and you go somewhere elevated where you can see the hilal, hopefully, and there's no clouds. If, let's say you get there and it's cloudy, there's atmospheric obstructions, and you're not able to see the hilal, and you and 10, 20 other people are doing the same thing, and no one saw it. But then later that day, later that evening, someone comes from another neighborhood and says, I went out to this area and I saw the hilal. If they are upright, if they are a person of adala, they're not openly corrupt, their testimony as a single individual would be accepted. Now, in an Islamic society, this person would have to go to the qadi, right? The qadi would hear that person's testimony, and it would be enough for one person to see it for that to be accepted. But if it's a clear day and there's no clouds in the sky, you can't just have one person seeing it. Because if it was so clear, it would be clear enough where others besides that person could see it. There's a doubt there. Maybe he really didn't see it. But on a cloudy day, there's a possibility that we didn't see it because of the clouds, but this person did because of where he was located. But on a clear day, there has to be more than just one person. How many should it be? In the Hanafi school, it's up to the qadi. If the qadi determines from experience that it should be 5, 10, 15 people, then he sets the number according to his experience. And that's that. So the qadi has a job of listening to those who are speaking about sighting the moon and determining if they're upright and determining if he's going to call the next day the first day of Ramadan or consider it the 30th of that lunar month. So in the beginning of Ramadan, let's say, now we don't have a qadi here, but let's say there is. Let's say you go out, it's a cloudy day, so it's enough for one person to see the moon, and you see it, but others didn't see it. And you go to the qadi and say, I saw the hilal, and he doesn't accept your testimony. And he says, no, tomorrow is going to be the 30th of Sha'ban because the moon hasn't been sighted. But you saw the hilal. What do? Do you fast or do you listen to the qadi and consider that the 30th of Sha'ban? I heard two different answers. I heard some people say listen to the qadi. Okay, if you listen to the qadi is ruling that it's the 30th of Sha'ban, but you saw the hilal. You know what you saw. Right, so in the school of Imam Abu Hanifa, if you see the hilal alone on a cloudy day and the qadi rejects your testimony, you saw it, you fasted, even if no one else is. However, they say, if you fasted the next day and no one else is, and you start to get waswasa and doubts and people are casting aspersions on what you say you saw, and you broke your fast, you broke it on purpose, but because of these doubts and because the qadi didn't accept your testimony, you don't have to do the expiation of fasting 2 months consecutively. You just have to make up that day. So it's not the same as purposely breaking the fast because you want to eat. There's a shubha here. There's a doubt. There's a ta'wil that would downgrade that to just making up a day and not an expiation. Anyhow, we're not going to face any of this here because we don't have a qadi. So in the beginning of Ramadan, it all depends on whether it's cloudy or clear. At the end of Ramadan, it's a little bit different because you have the issue of ishhad and ikhbar. There's a slight difference here. At the end of Ramadan, it's still Ramadan, the 29th. If you go out and it's cloudy, there has to be 2 free males or 1 male and 2 females testifying that they saw the hilal marking Shawwal. If it's clear, likewise, you have to have a large body determined by the qadi, right? So we don't really face this issue here, but I argue that it's relevant because we need to know how the Sharia works in its very basic elements so we can understand some of the approaches taken here in North America to the issue of moon sighting. So here are the issues. I'm going to go back to this slide just to keep you from looking at it. You have to understand something. In the Islamic society, where Sharia is the rule of law, there is a division of responsibilities. The Imam of the masjid has a single job, which is to lead the 5 salawat. The mu'adhin has a single job, which is to call the adhan. The qadi has his own job, which is to adjudicate and determine things like the sighting of the moon. It is the job of the qadi to deal with marital disputes, to deal with criminal law and things like that. But in North America, we don't have qudat, we don't have any kind of governance where Sharia is the law of the land, which means that many imams across North America are wearing several hats. The imam is leading the prayers, and he's dealing with marital issues between husband and wife, so he's playing the role of a qadi. He's dealing with moon sighting issues, also the role of a qadi, and the board of the masjid is acting like the deputies of the Khalifa responsible for the collection and distribution of zakat. So we've taken on all of these hats because we don't have Islamic governance, and this creates a lot of challenges, particularly in the area of moon sighting. You ever notice back home, you don't really have debates about whether the moon was sighted or not because it either is or isn't.
We do.
Oh yeah, now you do because it's the age of globalization. But go back 30, 40 years before the internet was a thing, and the vast majority of people are just going with whatever the authorities said. And they are deferring to whatever qadi or body of scholars receive reports on the sighting, whatever they decided. So they announce what it's going to be, and it trickles down, and the rest of society accepts it, and there's no real fighting. In this society, we don't have a qadi to make those decisions, so it's left up to every masjid, every organization, and you get multiple ways that the moon is sighted or when Ramadan is declared. We have to understand, though, that the beginning of Ramadan is not a private matter for people to decide. That individual may see the hilal on his own, and the qadi may reject his testimony. Yes, it's a possibility. But determining the beginning of Ramadan is not for individual people to decide on their own. It's a collective decision. So possible sightings are raised to the qadi, and it's his job to determine whether to accept them or reject them. Because this is applied to everyone in the locality who is either fasting that next day or not fasting, right? And this is why you don't find as many disagreements in Muslim majority countries, because you have some body determining the start and end dates of these months. So the process of establishing and announcing the date ensures the communal objective of Ramadan, because we're not just fasting on our own. We're fasting, we're breaking our fast, we're praying Taraweeh together. We have the last 10 nights of Ramadan. There's i'tikaf, which is also semi-communal because there's other people in the masjid with us. There is Eid together. So Ramadan and the Eid is a communal process. It's a communal activity. So the process for determining the months has to be taken by some authority that can declare when it starts or doesn't start for everyone to follow. This is the ideal. But what do we do here? As one teacher said, in America, Islam in America is like the wild, wild west. It really is. Because if you want to create your own weird cult, Muslim cult, you could buy some property, build a masjid, call it masjid of whatever, and you could create your own quasi-Islamic religion if you wanted to. If you wanted to declare yourself Shaykhul Islam over the North American continent and create a YouTube channel and give fatwas for the whole continent, you could do that. And you may have 2 followers. But hey, it's America, it's the wild, wild west. We don't have central authority that gets to determine the way we do things. So, as religious minorities, without authorities here, each community is going to have to decide the process they go with to determine the start and end of the lunar months. And there's 3 main methods. And you could add 2 more that aren't really valid. You have the local sighting. We have communities here. We have masajid here in Pittsburgh who do that. They don't rely on sightings from other locations in North America, much less other countries. They go to a predetermined location somewhere here in Pittsburgh, and they go look for the hilal. If they see it, they fast. If they don't, they wait one more day. And they do the same at the end of Ramadan. It's very simple for them. That's a small community. You have those who go with global sighting. So they wait to see for the reports of individuals in other locations who have seen the hilal, if it's not possible to see it here. And a lot of the hilal committees, you have the hilal committee in Chicago, you have the hilal committee in Toronto. These are basically committees of multiple masajid that have connections with many individuals around the world. And these people are vetted and they're known, and they call them to get reports on whether it was sighted here or there. And usually they make the determination by, 11 o'clock at night or something like that, depending on the viability of seeing the hilal in some part of the world. That's the global sighting. And then you have the masajid that go by the calculations. And that's what we do here. We go by the calculations, the astronomical calculations. So you know ahead of time, according to the calculation, Ramadan will start April 2nd, right? And that it ends May 1st. See, you already know, according to the calculation. No one else would know that if because they're not going by calculation. You have a couple other methods that people do. You have some people who say, well, I'm just waiting to see what Saudi's doing. You've heard that before? That's completely invalid. Just because it is Ardul Haramain doesn't mean that it has a special privilege in announcing for the rest of the ummah when Ramadan starts and ends. That's invalid. The other thing some people do is they don't follow any of this stuff. They just call their parents back home. Are you guys fasting tomorrow? No, because they want to time the fasting with their family back home, so when they're calling and congratulating, it's the same day. So they have Eid the same day and Ramadan the same day. Never mind the fact that if they call and say Eid Mubarak, if it's 8 hours difference, it's already passed. So anyhow. So each of these methods of the 3, local sighting, global sighting, and astronomical calculations, they do have a basis within the 4 madhahib. Okay? You have astronomical calculations, al-hisab al-falaki. This is a strong view in the Shafi'i school. However, it is not what most people think it is. And we're going to go back to that in a moment. Global sighting, where you rely on the reliable sighting of individuals in some other region of the world, this is a strong view. Indeed, it's said to be the strongest view in the Hanafi school and the Hanbali school. It's also a view in the Maliki school. Completely valid. And local sighting is seen as the strongest view in the Shafi'i school, and it's a view in the Maliki school. What you're going to find is that in each school, there's a variety of opinions. So within a single school, you have views in favor of global sighting, local sighting, whatnot. But going back to this astronomical calculations, here's the controversial part. I'll be frank with you. In the Shafi'i school, the texts that describe the calculations are in the context of when there's atmospheric blockages, things that prevent people from seeing the hilal, whether it's clouds or whatever. In the Shafi'i school, they say that if there is atmospheric interference, clouds and whatnot, such that the hilal cannot be seen, then they would calculate whether that day is likely to, the next day is likely to be Ramadan or not. There is nowhere in the Shafi'i school that allows the calculations. Nowhere in the school does it say that the calculations can be the default setting for every single month, regardless of the environmental conditions. So this is why, although this is a very popular view used among many of our masajid in North America for obvious reasons with scheduling, and is still within the scope of the school, it's not as closely associated with the school as people think, because there's a condition there that doesn't seem to be met every single year. So this is why people should consider revisiting that. If they want to do that, they can, but it doesn't sit right. But at the end of the day, if a community decides to go with any of these approaches, you and me as an individual Muslim, we go along with the group because they're all basically valid, and we don't cause a scene, we don't cause arguments and fitna to try to get people to take our position, because at the end of the day, it is a communal experience. It doesn't make sense to cause fights where half the community is fasting one day, the other half is not fasting. In a single masjid, I mean. If one community wants to take the local sighting approach, they're free to do that. If one community wants to do the global sighting, they're free to do that. And even if the fasting days don't coincide perfectly, everyone is doing their best to follow what they believe is the best for them in their context. So we're not going to fight people over this stuff. But if a person wants to weigh the pros and cons of each, I would argue that the calculations is the weakest of them, and that the connection between the current calculation method and the Shafi'i school is not as tight as people think it is. Because the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ says, فَقْدِرُوا لَهُ. If it's not seen, you estimate it. So the illah, the legal, the operative ruling is not seeing the moon. It's not just calculations as a default. The Shafi'i school does allow calculations if one person saw the moon on a cloudy day and they don't, and the testimony is not enough, they can go in favor of calculation. But never will you find something in the Shafi'i school saying that on a clear day you can calculate in lieu of sighting. So this is where the controversy lies. Anyhow, now we've gotten past the moon sighting, we can get to the fasting. We mentioned the definition, the ta'rif, and we said there are 6 things within it. Fasting is refraining from entering anything into the body cavity, whether deliberately or accidentally, or engaging in intercourse, from true dawn to the time the sun sets, accompanied with the intention of fasting from individuals who are permitted to fast. We're going to be revisiting this definition next week, and we're going to look at the issue of intention, how you formulate the intention. We're going to look at the things that break the fast and the different types of things that break the fast. We'll look at what does not break the fast. We'll look at things that are disliked, things that are preferred, and we'll look at i'tikaf very briefly and some of the spiritual aspects of fasting. So the core fiqh of fasting is covered next week, and today we covered the definitions and the terms and the issue of the moon sighting and the various types of fast. Next week, and we have it here, the intention of fasting in general, Ramadan and other fast, the muftirat, what breaks the fast and their categories, what does not break the fast, what is disliked while fasting, what is fidya, and menstruation issues in fasting, modern issues in fasting. People ask a lot of questions like, can I get a shot? Can I use an inhaler? Can I take this? Can I take a nicotine patch if I'm smoking and I can't smoke during the daytime of Ramadan? Can I use the nicotine patch? These kinds of issues. We'll look at the i'tikaf and the spiritual dimensions of fasting, insha'Allah ta'ala. Wallahu wa rasuluhu a'lam wa sallallahu wa sallama ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. So we have 5 minutes before Isha. So if we have any questions, we can take a few. Yes?
When Islam decided to go with a calculation method, one of the reasons was sighting the moon is not a means, not a goal itself. It's just a means to achieving certainty. So is looking at the moon, like visually looking at the moon, the objective, or calculating the month?
Well, calculation, the asl, the foundation is to do the sighting based on the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, which is the actual physical sighting. So if we're operating within the framework of the four schools, the foundation, the default is the physical sighting with the eyes, and the Shafi'i school allows for the calculations, and even in the Maliki school there's a view from Qarafi, but that was always in the context of the hilal being obscured due to cloud coverage and the like. And in the Shafi'i school also they would allow calculation when one person claims to have sighted the moon, or maybe more than one person, but the calculation is determining that wouldn't be possible. They would go in favor of calculation over the lone witness testimony that is questionable. But again, they never said that calculation can become the default for establishing the beginning and ending of every single month, regardless of the cloud conditions. So, I'm aware of their reasoning, and a lot of the reasoning has to do with fulfilling certain objectives. To have the Eid holidays recognized in the United States as an official holiday, it's important that there's a set date for that. There's even a joke that goes around. The employer calls the boss and says, I have to take off my religious holiday of Eid. And the boss says, sure, no problem. When is it? Could be tomorrow. Could be the next day. Could be the day after. How about you give me all three? Right? So in the interest of having it recognized as a national holiday, that would only be possible if it's a fixed day each year. So it's put on calendars ahead of time. That's one reason. The other reason is obviously scheduling. Because if you can schedule that day off ahead of time at work, it makes life easier. Same for school. Like there's obvious, these reasons didn't exist in the past. If you ask me, I don't think that's enough, but that's just me. But at the end of the day, as I said, if a community has decided on one approach, if no one should try to create dissension and fitna and fighting over the issue. If there's to be a change in policy, it should be a collective decision in consultation with ulama, thought out, in a way that is done together, because it is, after all, a communal decision. And the masajid, the boards, the executive councils, whatever you want to call them, they are acting effectively as the qadi. So they are acting in that capacity to determine these start dates. So it has to be, if you're going to change policies, it should be done in a very careful way, not to create more fitna and drama in the masajid. Unfortunately, there are many masajid where that happens every single year. People are fighting as if this year they're going to solve the issue. They didn't solve it the year before, or the year before that, or 20 years ago, but this year they're going to solve it. It doesn't work. So we have to be more intelligent in how we deal with these issues.
So I would just like to add that it's not the ISNA, it's the Fiqh Council of North America.
The Fiqh Council of North America.
ISNA is not the fiqh body.
Right.
So it's important to know the distinction, because people might say, oh, you're just following ISNA, it's not even a fiqh body.
Yeah, if you actually go on the ISNA site, you won't find this.
Right.
You have to go to the Fiqh Council of North America. But due to its affiliation with ISNA, they've come to be associated with one another like that. You're right. Yes.
You could see it like through telescope. Is that also?
That's not calculation. That's the naked eye. With or without a visual aid, that's fine.
And what about the global sighting? Like how it was fulfilled before modern era? And like
Well, in the pre-modern era, it wouldn't be global sighting across continents, because they didn't have, that wouldn't be possible. That wouldn't have been possible until the telegram, right? So what you had in the past that established the precedent for global sighting is the hadith of Ibn Abbas radiallahu anhuma, which speaks about one locality not sighting, and then a traveler arriving from another locality entirely, reporting that they saw the hilal and him acting on that. So that establishes the precedent of acting on the sighting of a completely different region if you have upright witnesses from that region testifying that they saw the hilal. So that establishes the basis for global sighting. What happens a lot of times is it's not always possible. You look at the visibility charts, you can't see the hilal over most of the world. It would only be possible to see the hilal with the naked eye or with a telescope in places like Argentina or Chile or something. And guess what? The Hilal committees have contacts in Chile and they're on the phone with them. So this is how it gets established for the global sightings. It's been a few Ramadans in the past, that's exactly how it was established. No one's seeing it in California at the final hour, but then people in Chile, they see it. Muslims.
So we go by what they say?
If you go by the global sighting and you're linked up with those masajid and individuals in that network, that would suffice you. You would go with that. Yeah. So you have the Hilal committees in different cities. Usually it's a collection of masajid operating on this framework, and they have contacts in different locations and they do this.
So while we have that issue, like why don't everybody like start the same day if we have?
Well, if you want to do local sighting and not global sighting, who's going to force you to adopt their way? Because there are varieties of ways to do it, and they're all valid in our fiqh tradition, and you can't force any of this down anyone's throat. We just have to live with the differences and respect them. It offers you an interesting perspective though, because if your friends who go to this masjid fasted a day earlier than you, and you fasted the day after, what do you do when you get to the last 10 nights of Ramadan? Is it the 26th, the 27th? It means that instead of just doing things on the odd nights, you should be doing on the even nights too, because you never know. Maybe what you think is the 27th is actually the 26th, or vice versa. Yeah.
So there's this other argument that happens about following Saudi Arabia.
Right.
The fact that during Hajj, you technically have to follow Saudi Arabia because of Hajj and when they do it. And there was this whole discussion about whether or not we can choose which Eid we follow based off moon sighting. And they have Arafah because you would have to fast. They have Arafah, know when to fast that day. So how do you respond to such arguments?
So Muslims living, let's press rewind on that one for a second. If you are going for Hajj and you enter the Haram, or you enter the areas of the miqat, and you're timing everything with that, you're going with their sighting for the establishment of the manasik. There's no other alternative. You're going with them. But is there a direct connection between the manasik of Hajj and what Muslims are doing in other continents in the 10 days of Dhul Hijjah? No, there's no intrinsic connection, which means that we don't have to ensure that our fasting on the day of Arafah coincides with the Arafah there. So let's say we sighted the moon locally or globally, and we saw the moon a day before it was announced in Saudi Arabia. So for the Hujjaj, they're going to be standing at Arafat the day after we fasted. So for them, their day of Arafat will be our day of Eid, because we went with a global sighting somewhere else or a local sighting. There's nothing that says that we're required to ensure that our acts of worship and our fasting on the day of Arafat coincides with the manasik and when they start. And this would be the answer. There's no legal basis to say that we have to follow any particular country in their official sighting of the moon.
It wasn't even possible in the old days.
And it wasn't even possible. Not only that, but there are Saudi scholars, and I'm very familiar with these fatwa, where they would tell Pakistanis and Bangladeshis and others who were coming there working, they would tell them, do not rely on our sightings because we have problems. Because here's the thing, go do this as homework. Maybe it's changed now, but if you go back some years, it just so happened to be that the Saudi calendars always coincided with the sightings. So some of the Saudi scholars told people from other countries, don't rely on us, because there are issues, there's politics involved. So there's that too. It's a complex world. You know, we're in a globalized world. Everything is interconnected, and we have work, we have school, we have family life. So what decision is made to coordinate our fasting? If you were in a small town or a small village, you could just say, let's go outside and look for the hilal. We either see it or we don't. We don't have to get on the phone. We don't have to consult anyone's calculations, and life is nice and easy. And that's how it used to be, by the way. Sayyidina Umar ibn Abdul Aziz said, and I'll leave you with this because it's time for Salat. He said that new issues that come up, nawazil, that require Islamic answers, troublesome issues that require Islamic answers, they come up in proportion to our sins. So the more sins we get ourselves involved in as an ummah, the more complexities come into our life that require these kinds of answers, right? If you live a very simple life in a village, it's always local sighting and life is easy. But alhamdulillah. And we go back to Imam Abu Hanifa, who says, if it's cloudy, you need one witness at least, it's good. If it's not cloudy, you need more than one. Keep it simple. Alhamdulillah.